We live?
We're live. We are ready to go. Hi, everybody. We would love to hear from you. Anybody who's on, feel free to ask a question, give us a shout out. We will be here. We'll be answering questions. So I'm Amanda Patterson, and this is
Dr. Rachel Needle.
And we're excited to present to you for the next 8 weeks, the business of private practice. We have come together and put a series together, and we are here to help you build the practice that you have wanted to. Rachel, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so Amanda and I have been working with my private practice collective to come up with a lot of great information for you to support you in building the practice that you want, so that you are able to have the life that you want and be able to work the number of hours and the days that you want. So we're really excited to start here today by talking to you about building blocks of a smart practice. So welcome.
So, Rachel and I both started our practices. My practice now has been open since 2013. When I think about that, it's just kind of wild to me because it's been 7 years. Rachel, when did you open your practice?
2009, I believe. So it's been about 10 years now.
Yeah, that's great. And
well,
so
I opened my private practice in 2006. Sorry, I opened my larger group in 2010.
So, one thing that has definitely, changed is the internet, even in the past 7 to 10 years since we have gone into practice, right? So that's been kind of an interesting thing to see. And so let's talk about like maybe how we have used things like social media, some of these, basics, the building blocks to start our practice and tie that into social media. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's really important, because the way that we market is a lot different now because of the growth of the internet and social media. Is that what you want to talk about first?
Well, yeah, and just like, there's so much information out there, right? Nowadays, you can Google things, you're on Facebook groups, you're like now people are watching us. Like, how can people really figure out like the basics for their practice? Like, what are some things? Let's kind of like talk that out. Like we've kind of made a list, we've talked this through ourselves. Like, what are some things that we can, share with our audience on, how to build up that practice?
So I think the most important thing to start with is deciding what kind of practice you want to have, right? What do you want out of private practice? So do you want to be alone in a practice? Do you want other people in a practice, to be in a practice with other people? And what do you want out of it? So what's your goal of private practice? Is your goal to make more money? Is your goal to be able to have flexibility with your schedule? And what kind of clients you want to see? So I think trying to point, and starting point. We had talked about this, I think, a little bit, Amanda, and just in terms of clarifying what your goals are, knowing how you want to begin. And to do that, once you do that, you can decide what type of business you want to be. So you have to incorporate in some way. So some people choose to do an LLC, like a sole proprietorship. Some people decide to do an S Corp. It just depends on how much you're going to be working, what you expect to make. So you have to make those decisions first.
I think that's so important. I think that a lot of people are like, I just want to go into private practice, and they're not really sure what that exactly looks like, right? So there's a couple of options. You can rent from people. That's how I started. I was renting from somebody. I was renting by the hour, and I just jumped into, doing that. You can get your own office space. A lot of people start by getting their own office space, depending on what city you live in. It can be, moderately affordable, right? To go right into a suite or sharing a suite with somebody. Again, very popular option. Some people are natural extroverts, really like community and want to join a group practice. because they need that support, right? Like I have a group practice, and that's what I found from a lot of people in my group practices. They don't want to sit every day. They don't want to be by themselves. They don't want to, go from one client to another client and not have any social interaction. So I think like, through every step of your private practice, like knowing who you are and knowing what your needs are is going to be really important. There, were times I remember even when I was renting, like I was the only person in the office. There wasn't anybody to run an idea off of or say, hey, do you want to grab a drink afterwards? And, sometimes there was somebody and that was great. And then other times I was alone. And so if you really thrive in communities, joining a group practice may be a good starting point. A lot of people join group practices and then go on to start their own solo practices or their own group practices. I know as group practice owners, we always are like, please don't leave me, please don't leave me. But I think that knowing the kind of people that you have at your practice is really important.
And I think those are good points. I mean, it can be very isolating, and you can start one way and grow into something else. So you can start in, let's say, like even some people like to go to an executive suite because it's all inclusive, very inexpensive. And then they decide that they don't want to be alone and they decide to join a group. You can join a group, and another option is you can rent space in a practice that has other therapists. So there are those variety of options. I know a number of group practices that are, call themselves group practices, but really it is space within, it doesn't operate under one necessarily on one legal entity, but they call themselves a group practice. So there's a lot of different options with that. And like you said, you need to know yourself. You need to know how you're going to thrive and what it is that you need. A lot of people don't want to do the business part themselves, which is another benefit of being in a group practice, right? You don't have to make your appointments. You don't have to do your billing. You don't have to figure all that out. So you can still be in private practice and within a group.
Yeah, I think talking about the business is really important. Is there a delay? Yeah. So I think that's really important, talking about business. Technology issues. This is what happens sometimes. So hopefully as the video goes, it'll kind of catch up. So, it's always really important to look at the kind of business that you want to run, whether you want to have an LLC. In some states, it require a PLLC, which is, I think, a professional LLC, or having an S Corp. I'm going to go on my soapbox for a moment. I think it's really important at whatever stage that you're starting that you have an accountant. I had an accountant who advised me from the beginning to do an LLC with an S Corp. I think maybe the accountant knew or saw that I was sort of ambitious and that it would make sense for me in the long run to have that. And so what that does is I do actually end up paying myself a payroll, and then there are some benefits by taking distributions, but there have been other tax benefits to having that S Corp. That's not for everybody though. For some people, just having an LLC, taxes and LLC is going to be a good fit. But I'm not going to give you that advice, and I know Rachel's not going to give you that advice. Having an accountant and paying for that accountant is really going to be in your best interest. A lot of accountants will do free consultations with you as long as you decide to use their services. So if you have like your sort of like personal accountant, I think that seeing if they will do your business or finding a business accountant to really get you set up. What do you think?
Regardless of which one you decide, and again, we're not going to give you that complete advice, but we can tell you some benefits. And that is, when Amanda talks about the S Corp, one of the benefits of the S Corp and being on payroll is that you're not then paying your self-employment taxes. When you pay just yourself, right, there's increased self-employment taxes on that. This way, when you do payroll, that takes those taxes out, so that you don't have to then at the end be paying them, which is a much larger number than if you do it this way. That's my understanding of how I've worked with my accountant, one of the benefits. And I have a number of companies, and some of them are S Corps and some of them are not. And so I found that as a way you can write things off.
Yep, you can write different things off in an S Corp, and then one of the greatest benefits is that you pay yourself, like I pay myself a set salary. I pay myself the same thing every 2 weeks, every year for the most part. And then I take a certain percentage of the it's profits from each month and pay myself in a distribution, and that is taxed at a lower level. Now, the distributions can't be greater than your salary. They're not really, it's supposed to pay yourself a reasonable and typical salary for a therapist. So I work with my accountant to find out what that was from the IRS. I pay myself a salary, and then I take a certain amount. And that really depends on what's going on in the world. Like right now, just, didn't take a distribution. Why? Because of everything that's going on. But I took my regular salary, but that is taxed at a little bit of a lower rate. So you get a tax benefit from there. And from what I have kind of been told is that if you're making under $40,000 a year, that's gross, right into your business, that using your social security number, it might be okay. Between the $40,000 and $100,000 range is when you want to think about having an LLC. And if you are grossing over $100,000, it kind of makes sense for you to have an S corp, or at least being taxed as an S corp. I'm an LLC taxed as an S corp. And so again, that's where you want to talk to your accountant. Those are rough numbers, rough estimations. That's usually what I, teach people when I do these kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think it varies. And one really great thing, we actually have an interview with an accountant addressing all of these things, which will be part of, our course when we publish it in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so that's exciting. Like having some like instant access to an accountant. I know that people get like a little nervous, like going to see an accountant and, asking questions, and, it can be kind of nerve wracking. Like I'm like bare my soul to my accountant, 4 times a year when he does like my taxes and things. And I'm like, this is how much I've spent on this. Is that okay? Like, what about this? And where could I save here? And what could I do there? Right. And so I remember my first really successful year in private practice, it was like, I think maybe 2 years in, when I was like starting to actually like make some money. And I had based my taxes off the year before, and then I got my first tax bill. It was like, I was like, I owed like that much in taxes. I finally understood like why business owners like always complained about taxes, right? And so once I learned like, no, you actually have to save for taxes, and you have to, go like prepare for these things, then I was much better place, especially like this time around, we kind of had some preparations made for increases.
So it's pretty funny. I think I leave my accountant's office crying almost every time. I literally I have a number of different companies. I do a lot of different things. And so it's about organizing, and that gets stressful. And then whenever she gives me the numbers and she's like, and I need you to write a check for this for I'm like, no. And she's like, Rachel, reminder, that means you did really well if you have to write that check, that large of a check. I'm like, okay, fine. You can try to reframe for me, but let me just be upset right now. I don't want to write that check.
Yeah, and again, I think I would say my biggest business ally is my accountant. There are other allies that I have. A lot of people talk about lawyers, and I've certainly hired lawyers too. I do think they're very helpful, but your accountant is really sort of like your biggest ally. So once somebody decides like, yes, I'm going to rent my own space, right? And I'm going to, create an LLC. What's the next step? I'm assuming something like maybe naming their practice or figuring out like what kind of practice they want. Yeah.
Come up with a name that's fitting. And I always tell people it's really important to decide what type of client you want to see, right? Are you going to have a specialty and a niche in that practice, or are you going to be seeing a variety of different clients? But it's important to really hone in on the type of clients you want to see, because everything from that point on, and even the name, is you want directed to that, possibly. So you want all the marketing that you're going to do, all the outreach you're going to do should be geared and around what kind of client it is that you want to be seeing or specializing in your practice. So yes, coming up with a good name that's fitting based on what your plan is and the type of client you want to see is important.
So I'm going to give a cautionary tale. So back in the day, before Google really caught on to a lot of these like ways that people were trying to, I guess, trick them, or it was really important to have your URL for your website, have the name of your location to come up on the Google search, right? So you wanted to be, West Palm Beach counseling or West Palm Beach psychologist or what, um, and so I I kind of followed that adage initially and named my group practice Caring Therapists of Broward. Many of you know that. And if you follow me, you'll know that I both now have Caring Therapists of Broward and Caring Therapists of Palm Beach, and that our URL for our website is still just Caring Therapists of Broward, because to sort of rebrand the whole thing, Caring Therapists isn't available. They wanted like, I don't know, $5,000 for that URL. I'm like, you can keep it. Like, I'm not paying that. And I didn't really want something with a dash. And so when you're thinking of your name while doing it, specific to your location might make sense. You never know where your life is going to take me. If you would have asked me 7 years ago, was I going to end up in, West, now I'm in Royal Palm Beach, which is near West Palm Beach, for those of you who are watching from far away. If I was going to end up in, with 2 offices, in one office in Broward and one in West Palm, I would have been like, no way. Like, this doesn't even make sense. I didn't even know anybody in West Palm Beach at that time. So you just want to be mindful of that. And then sort of the same thing with your name. If you make it your name and you are determined to only have a group or an individual practice, you may have a group practice one day and your name might not work. So these are just, usually as therapists, I think we tell people to think in the short term and not catastrophize and not go too far out and stay present. When you're building a business, you actually want to think like 5 steps out.
I think that's a really important point. Make it something that's general enough where it's not tied to a specific location. I think that's a really good point. So once you kind of do that, you have to then, once you have your name, once you've decided what kind of niche and what kind of practice you want to be, you need things like paperwork set up, right? So you need specific paperwork for your center, such as your demographic form, your notice of privacy practices, so your HIPAA form, your consent form, a release of information. So those are important things to start with. And, you can design them on your own or even ask people for, or, go to an attorney. It's really important, I think, to have attorney approved forms. Or there's a number of different places, including us, that have attorney approved forms that we sell to people. So you can decide sort of how you want to do it, if you want to kind of build your own, or if you want to purchase from somebody who's already done it, like at My Private Practice Collective. So, but it's important that you have good paperwork, because as we know, those HIPAA compliant forms and are really important, especially down the line if something were to happen. Did you want to add to that? I know there's a delay.
I was going to add, you really, again, going back to the kind of niche that you want to have and the kind of practice that you want to have, you really want paperwork that is specific to that. There might be certain types of practices that you do, certain techniques that you may want like an additional layer of paperwork. People who have like EMDR practices, for instance, you may want to put some information in your informed consent about EMDR. I'm thinking like Rachel with sex therapy, you may want to put some information in your paperwork about that. There might be just some considerations that might be important to have it like niche specific, especially things like even couples counseling, right? You need to have 2 sets of paperwork. Maybe there's different information. So I agree. That's where you definitely need a lawyer.
Yeah, for sure. And then you need to decide if you want to do your paperwork on paper or if you want to do electronic medical records. And if you do, you can go through, and there's a number of platforms that exist that you can just have it all housed there. So it's in the cloud and on a platform, and you don't have to worry about keeping paper charts. So it just depends how you want to structure your office. So I started out with paper charts. I still have 2 huge filing cabinets in my group filled with paper charts. I have, I think, 2 therapists still that prefer to do it that way, but almost everybody is now integrating into doing that through an electronic medical record system, because it's just easier to have that way, in my opinion. So it just depends on your way of keeping track and what's easiest for you.
Yeah, I have the same, it's so funny. This is why Rachel and I like decided to team up and really work together on some things, 'cause our paths are so, even though we do sort of like different things, our paths are so similar. Like I have paper files, I've got them locked away in a file cabinet from when I originally started, just handwriting of papers. And then I've gone through some electronic health records. You know, our group practice uses therapy notes, which has been really great. I do recommend them for if you are ever thinking about doing a group practice, just because it's really easy to sort of manage multiple people on your team. But I think for most group practices, they do use electronic health records at this point. Why? Because, you know, it's just like to be able to really manage what you need to manage, unless you're at like a fully private pay practice and you use an invoicing system. I think a lot of practices have moved to doing electronic health records. I really don't recommend at this stage, in this time in 2020, when we're doing this, maybe somebody will be watching this in the future, that you use paper records. There are some people who are trained sort of like, I don't want to use the word old school, but old school to, you know, handwrite things, you know, sort of a traditional way. But I think like given the climate, given audits, given, you know, subpoenas from courts, boards, all of these things, having an electronic health record really, really makes sense.
It also makes it easier, I think, for billing purposes. If you do decide, and we're going to get into this a little bit more you know, we'll talk about it today, but really more in depth in another one of these lives. But if you're going to be using insurance, a lot of them require it at this point. And even those that don't, like, it's easier to bill through the electronic medical record system than it is when you're on paper, because there's a whole lot more paperwork that way. So you have to consider that as well.
I'm just going to check the Facebook to see if we've got any questions coming through. I've got a couple people saying hi. Hi, Casey. Hi, Randy. Hi, Charles. If anybody's got some questions for us, we are here. We are live. We are excited to be here. Let us know your questions. If you're, you know, really a beginning person, really wondering how you can start a practice, what are those building blocks? We are excited to share with you some of our thoughts. So let's recap here. You're getting the kind of business you want, where you're going to do it, what your niche is going to be. You got an electronic health record. What's next?
So I think that, you know, one thing that's really important is to make sure that you have your liability insurance, and decide who you're going to get that from. You know, I'd say take 2 or 3 places and compare the pricing and go from there. So that's something that doesn't take very long, but that's really important. And, you know, I think just to back up a little bit, something that I think we skipped over is, you know, once you decide what your business name is going to be and how you're going to incorporate, you need to go online to the irs.gov, I think is where the website is, and apply for your EIN. That's employment identification number. Because whereas when you're operating as yourself, you use your social security number. When you're operating as a business and you're incorporated, you need to use the EIN number for everything, for your bank account, for billing, for everything, for them to know where to put the money, etc. And then you want to get your NPI as well, your national provider identification number. So you want to apply for your NPI if you haven't already done that.
You know, somebody asked me the other day, they're like, why do I need an EIN for my business? And I was like, it's like your it's your social security number for your business, basically. And so that's really easy to get. It's free. Your NPI number is free. These are things that you're really going to need to get. And also separating out that personal account and that business account. You know, a lot of these things people don't do maybe initially, and it's really things that I recommend that you do initially so that it doesn't all start to blend together, because it can be very easy for the boundaries between business and personal in a variety of ways to blend together. So by having a separate business account, you put your money there, you keep it separate, you write yourself out a check, and everything is nice and clean. That's probably like my personal professional opinion about things. So then that way it really operates like a business, because I think when you go into something and it feels like a business, you know, like if it walks like a business and talks like a business, it's going to feel like a business, it's going to be a business for you, and you're going to treat it that way, right? You're going to take it seriously. If you have to go in and, you know, maybe do some accounting using QuickBooks or Excel sheets or something, you're going to take it really seriously, I think. And it's going to, you know, get you to do things from the beginning that's going to be really reduce any headaches. Let's call it. That's a good way to put it.
And I recommend that people, when you have a business license, or when you're incorporated and you have your business account, like bank account, get a business credit card so that everything is going directly from the business, so that you don't have to keep track of your business expenses, because they've all been taken from this account if you have to write a check, and they've all been charged to this account if you have to make a credit card purchase, so that it is much easier to track your expenses, and therefore much easier to do your taxes at the end of the year. So make sure they're all tied together, and it makes it simple.
Yeah, and what's come up, I think, with what's going on with the pandemic, for instance, is that banks in general are going to be more willing to work with you when you need something, when you have a really good established relationship with them. If you already have a credit card, like a business account, a savings account, a credit card, and a credit line, like those are kind of like all of the things that you can get initially from a bank account, even if you have a credit line that you don't use. Like I have a small credit line through, I use BB&T. I have a credit line. If I needed it, I could take it. And I have a credit card with them that I don't happen to use that credit card for my business. I use a Chase credit card because Chase has like amazing point system. So that's why I happen to use that. But if I were to go into into BB&T and say, hey, I need a loan now, right? They're going to see I've been a member for 7 years. I've got a credit line. I've got a credit card, and I've got a savings account. They may be more willing to work with me versus just if I just had a checking account, or if I hadn't been like a member for a long time, or these kinds of things.
And while we're going to get into marketing in another one of our lives, and we'll be doing these every Monday at 3 o'clock for the next 3 weeks to start, and then we're going to establish some other topics. We're going to talk more about marketing, but just to kind of touch on that, when you start your practice, you want to make sure that you are establishing yourself in the way business or as an individual on Psychology Today. So a profile, and we can talk more about not just the benefits, but how to write a good profile as well. And while you do want to get business cards, because you do want to pass them out to everybody that you meet, no matter where you are. I mean, everybody, anything anyone says when I'm at a restaurant or, at an event, there is some way that I can interject that I'm a therapist and can hand them my card. So that's like, I mean, I must hand out at least 25 cards every time I'm at an event, not just even a networking event. So you do want to have that, but even more important, I think, Amanda, you say this a lot, is a website. So I'll let you kind of expand on that.
So yes, website. I am a big fan of websites. It's like one of the first things I did. I think when I first started my practice, I had like a lot of these ideas. You see my ideas here, they tend to do this. And then they do this, right? Because then they start to not make sense. And I tried to build out my own website initially, WordPress or something. And while it was sort of functional, it didn't do anything, right? It didn't bring me clients. It didn't rank on Google. It didn't really do much other than if somebody happened to come across it, they probably would have been like, oh, this has some decent information here, right? So I think it's really important that you are very purposeful in building out your website. Whether you decide to do that yourself, again, 7 years later, companies like Wix do a much better job of incorporating things like SEO or incorporating other things that you need to make your platform your website really stand out. I happen to use Brighter Vision, again, somebody I really trust, I really like. I've used them for this whole time. I have 2 websites from them, actually. What I like about them that works really well is because we have a group practice, we're constantly updating information. I'm sending new bios, new blog posts, new homepage, new pictures. It's really like this entity, right? This isn't just something I put up once and left it there. Brighter Vision will update those for free all the time. That worked really well for me. I know, Rachel, I think that you hired somebody to do your website. And can you tell us about that process?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's really important, again, to decide, in my mind, I tried to do it on my own at first as well. So I think what I found over time, and I know it's not an option for anybody, is to make money, you do have to spend money. So you can find people that are affordable and that are really good. And I'm happy to connect you with people because I have all ranges. I've worked with a lot of different website developers. I have a number of different businesses. So I'm happy to connect. But for me, it works well that I have a person that owns a company that I work with. And I'm able to send updates as well. Little things I can make the changes myself if I'm in a rush because it doesn't happen in 30 seconds. And a lot of times I'm really anxious and I'm like, no, I want it right now. So there are things that I'm able to do on my own, which is great because I use WordPress and I know how to make changes on it. And then when there are bigger items or ways that I want to expand in terms of marketing, et cetera, I can talk to the guy that does my web development and managing, and he can help me do that. And he has a whole company that's able to do that. So I think that, it's what works best for you individually. I don't want to sit here and say that you are going to have, 80 clients in the first week that you open your practice. I think it's really important for people to be realistic in what their expectations are. And, I know there's a lot of people that will say, hey, we'll help you build your practice and right away you'll have a lot of clients. And I think that's, listen, I'm a great business person and I don't see how that's possible. So I help people. I think Amanda and I both have the viewpoint of we help people to build, and we do promise you that you will have a large and thriving and successful practice, but that's not going to happen overnight. And the more you put into it and the more that you do the things that we kind of talk about over time, the more likely you are to get there. So it all depends on your situation, I think, in life. And I don't recommend that people just decide to up and quit one day. I think that you start learning some of this stuff so that you can do this smart. And that's why we called this sort of the series of a smart practice, right? We want you to do this in a smart way so that you're setting yourself up for success, and we mean that both emotionally and financially.
Yeah, I love that you talk about the emotional piece too, because I think that's a big part of it. I think that sometimes people are either like emotionally ready to go on because they're tired. You're watching this, you might say, yes, I am tired of my agency. I have been, watching lives. I've been listening to podcasts. I've been reading books, and like, I feel like I'm, sort of like emotionally ready. But then they're like, how am I financially going to, kick this off? And then other people might, you might be brand new. You might have just finished grad school and you're like, I don't need to make $100,000 next year. So let me, kind of build my way up into that. But I'm, sort of like with the skills and emotionally, need to get there. And so we hope that you get a lot of value out of this series that we're doing, because I think it's really important to be both sort of like emotionally ready and financially ready. And what we mean by financially ready is just having the tools necessary and ready for you to go out there and do what you need to do.
And just to add to that, emotionally, so that this doesn't tear you apart, right? Should be a really exciting process. Whether you're just starting or looking to expand and grow and thrive, it should be a lot of fun and really exciting. So of course, there's going to be times that are stressful. Any business, there's going to be stressful times, but we want this to be something that is a positive experience for you, right? Because then you're going to grow even faster. If you're enjoying while you're doing it and not feeling bogged down and stressed and anxious all the time, this is going to go a lot more smoothly than if you're not. So we're going to give you a lot of the tools to help you do that in a smoother, more successful, and smarter way.
So we talked about websites. Again, we're going to go into some marketing things. I liked what you said about business cards. A lot of people are like, you don't need business cards. And I think that I follow a lot of people. I have, and there are, I think, I'm going to put them in people in boxes right now, but two kinds of therapists that are building practices, either the tech therapist or the community-based therapist, right? There's a therapist who has AdWords, who's the first page of Google, who has a really great website and videos and blog posts. And then there is this practice that is really known in their community. They do walks, they do events, they set up tents, they hand out business cards, they know doctors. And I think like those are two different kinds of practices to me that both are viable, right? Like you can go into, just about any market and probably build up either one of those ways. It's just going to be based on what you like to do. Maybe I know when I opened my second office, so I'm in, actually, it's Wellington, Florida, and I have only done internet based marketing in the, now it's been 5 months that we've been here, because I have an office in Broward and I'm in Broward a lot. I just haven't done a lot of community based marketing, right? Though this is a very suburban area where you would think that community based marketing would really work. Internet marketing has worked just as well, I think, as community based. In Broward, initially it was much more community based. I handed out a lot of business cards, I handed out baskets, I met with people, and then I did the internet marketing sort of secondary. So I think that it's another place for you to ask yourself, like, who am I? Who am I, and what do I like to do? Am I more introverted? Do I like to write blog posts? Do I like to work on SEO? Or am I more extroverted? Do I like to go to dinners and hand out business cards?
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you can, walk away from this live with something, it's, all those points that we made about the things that you have to start, but start with just kind of free writing. What do you want to get out of private practice? What's important to you in private practice? What's your goal, right? So write down those three things. And and what kind of client do you want to work with? And start there, and then the rest will kind of flow from there. I often tell people when they're like, I can't think of a name, right? To write down 10 to 12 adjectives that describe you, or what, or like the practice you want to have, and then use those to help develop a good name.
That's exactly what we did. When I first started Caring Therapists of Broward, I was actually starting it with one of my friends who's in our group. Her name is Natalie Nesbitt. So shout out to she was really like my first private practice friend. And we were in her car, we were looking at spaces, and we were coming up this like adjectives for, I think, the word authentic. Like, what does authentic mean? And we didn't want to use the word authentic because that's a little heavy. It's not really, that's more of a word therapists use than I think like our client would use. And that's how we came up with the word caring, right? And so I think that's like it's a really fun memory that I have. And so definitely grab that paper, do it with a friend too, like do it with your private practice bestie, or, share in the group, like come in our group, my private practice collective, and say I'm looking for some adjectives for the word authentic, and see what you come up with. I think that I love, Rachel, what you said about like having fun. I remember one of my other like fond memories of starting private practice, when I would get calls, like it was like an adrenaline rush. Like I got a call, I did a consult, like somebody booked, and I would like text like a friend of mine every time I booked somebody, like new client, new client, new client. Even if it was just like one new client a week, yeah, it was like I felt like I'm on top of the world. It was fun. The energy was fun, and I think because there was a clear plan, right? There were some clear steps as to what needed to happen, and then when it started to happen, that was cool. Rachel, do you have any like fond memories from when you first started your practice?
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things when you say like, not just have fun with it, like, yeah, I definitely would get excited. I think for me, what was most exciting too was actually getting clients for the therapist that joined my group when I started my group. So I get really excited when I'd have a fantastic therapist, want to join my group. And then really excited when I started filling their schedules also. So that was really, that was like a high too. But I think also, one of the things that was really important for me was having sort of like a mentor, right? Like somebody who I knew had done this. I was doing it in similar time frame, but they were very successful already, and I kind of, was able to go to them. So, and shout out to Dr. Lori Eichelberry, because that's who kind of was the person that helped me when I was, I'd ask her questions like, hey, what EMR are you using? Or, shoot, I just ran into this issue, how did you handle this? So I think Amanda and I, it's important to have people that you look up to and that you respect and that are really successful and that, emulate kind of where you want to be and where you want to go. And now I have Amanda, and we both do similar things. So, I think that's really important. And we're hoping that we can also be here for you throughout your process. Because again, I think it's really important to have that.
I couldn't agree more. I remember when I worked at an agency and I was starting my individual practice, and I had a supervisor say to me, she's like, now is time for you to start making money. And that really hit me because nobody said that to me before. In grad school, they're like, you're not going to make any money. You know, at my first job, they're like, hey, here's $36,000. Like, have fun eating, right? And paying your student loans and living in an apartment. And I'm like, you know, I remember crying when I found out how much my student loan payment was. That is a true story. Okay. And so, and I remember she said to me, now is the time for you to make money. And that like really hit me, you know, and that stuck with me, that she saw, I know she saw the compassionate part of me. She saw the part that worked at juvenile delinquent programs and helped, you know, stabilize, you know, young girls who were really going through a hard time. Shout out to any of my private practice friends who have, there's been quite a few of us in this group that have worked in those kinds of settings. And then now to be able to go into private practice and make money, again, in a way, I'm going to use the word authentic, in a way that is authentic and smart, to me, right? Like, I want everybody here to know that Rachel and I really aren't here to tell you that it's just one way, that you must only work with high functioning, you know, CEOs that can pay you $225 an hour. That there are, and that's great. If you want to do that, let's talk about that. That's awesome. But that there's going to be a wide variety of ways for you to make money and to be successful in private practice, even if it means things like you take insurance, or you offer a sliding scale, or you work with a certain population, or you work in a certain area, or you just do all private pay and you decide to do a group practice. I think there's a lot of different ways. That's really, I think, what Rachel and I have connected on.
Absolutely. And I love that. I think that's a great way to end, is by talking about like, now it's time for you to make money, right? And we're here to support you in doing that. And that's what we want to do, because our next live next week is about the finances of a smart practice. So we're going to talk about the finances and some of the things that we glossed over a little bit here. So I love what your supervisor said. Now it's time for you to make money, and from us to you, it's time for you guys to make money.
So let me just check the Facebook group and see if there's any questions. And maybe what we can do is ask people to submit some questions. Okay, so do you think having a special name for your practice is better than using your name? So yes, I think we kind of glossed over that really quickly. We do think having a special name might be better than your own name, just in case you ever decide you want to do a group practice, or you want to, so here's the other reality. I feel like I have a lot of realities that hit me. So a lot of you see here now, it says Amanda Patterson, LMHC. Well, guess what? I got married. I'm Amanda Landry now, and I like confuse the heck out of people with my two names. And so I don't necessarily regret it, because I do like, there's that, you know, part of me like right here that's like, I built that, you know, before I was married and on my own, and Amanda Patterson. But it is like confusing sometimes, like having two different names. I'm like, what name do I sign? Do I change my name on my profile? So I think yes. What do you think, Rachel?
I think it depends, right? I think that it's really important to brand something, and your name is definitely something that's brandable, right? You can brand yourself as, you know, Rachel Needle Saidi or Dr. Rachel Needle. And I have a website, drrachel.com. But I do think it's kind of like a tattoo. Like, what you like now might not be what you like later, right? So that's what's scary about, like, you get this butterfly today on your ankle and you might regret it. So think about what it is. Like, spend some time thinking about big picture, because we're going to help you think about, like, now in the next 6 months, the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 20 years. And we don't have to do all that, right? We don't want to. We want to focus on the next 6 months to start. But you want to think about big picture, and that could change. So branding a company name, right, could really benefit you, as long as you make sure your name's tied to it. So when people think Whole Health Psychological Center, my goal is for them to think about every person that works in my practice, not just me, right? But people know that I own the center, and they know that I'm a psychologist and that I work there. So it just depends. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Some people start out like, Rachel Needle, and they brand it like that, and then they add and associates. So that's an option too if you decide to grow. It just depends what you want to do. You may decide to have different side hustles in the future that you want to brand under the same name. So think about it from the beginning in terms of what your goals could be. I mean, you're not going to go wrong either way. Let me say that. Like, you're not going to go wrong if you decide to start with your name and then you decide that you want an actual practice name, right? Because you've already branded your name and you can use those followers and the people that know you and now brand the company name. However, if you know from the beginning you might want to expand and that you don't want to just be known by your name, I think that having a practice name is a really good thing to do.
I think that totally, makes sense. And for people who are, maybe they're like, I'm never leaving, Miami. I'm already, married, or I already have I'm not ever changing my name, or, I'm going to be the DBT therapist of, Miami. And that could be fine. Right. And so I think you're right. Like, there's a lot of considerations. Always go back to those questions. Like, through your private practice journey, having a journal is really great. I have like all kinds of journals. If that's how you express, or workbooks or worksheets or something where you put your ideas down so you can go through all of these. So let me check and see if there's any more questions. Not getting any real time questions. Let me see. I think we're good. So Rachel and I will be here every Monday. So next week, we're going to talk about finances. So if you're watching this on the replay, make sure to ask any questions. We can put those sort of together. We've come up with some things that we wanted to touch, but we really wanted this to be like free flowing, fun, natural, kind of like how Rachel and I like to build things, is just like really fun energy, but also very smart and informative. So if you have any questions for us, please comment below. We are going to be here live in my private practice collective next Monday at 3. Rachel, what do you got to say?
Thanks for joining us for the business blocks of a smart practice. And again, the series is about helping you to build a smart practice. So thanks so much for being here, and let us know if you have any additional questions. You can always reach out in Messenger or in the group.
Yep, we're here for you. So we will see you. Both of us will be here live next week talking about money. Okay, see you soon.